The rag had been damp for 10 minutes already. The 62-year-old man kept dragging it across the counter anyway, left to right to left, like stopping was the dangerous part. 6 in the morning? Atlanta. October, gray as cold ash. The bell chimed. A woman came in, jacket faded at the elbows, and went straight for the corner table by the window. She set 40 cents on the tabletop. Asked what that could buy. He poured the coffee. He set it down. He walked away. 3 weeks running. Every single morning. Then one morning something fell from her jacket pocket. Not a receipt. A check torn in half, the name of a private wealth management bank printed bold across the top. He picked it up. Looked at it for exactly 1 second. The fluorescent light overhead kept buzzing. Beyond the glass, a cashmere coat had just stopped on the sidewalk. He held the check out to her. Said nothing. The rag was already damp. Earl Whitfield knew that. Had known it for the last 10 minutes. But he kept moving it across the counter anyway. Left to right. Right to left. The same stretch of laminate he had wiped 1,000 mornings before. Because stopping meant standing still. And standing still meant thinking. And thinking before 6 in the morning in an empty café was something Earl had learned, over 3 years, not to do. Harlow Street Cafe. Atlanta, Georgia. A Tuesday in October. The kind of morning that arrived gray, and stayed that way. The kind that smelled like yesterday's coffee, and something fried, that never fully left, and the faint chemical bite of floor cleaner, that never quite worked. The fluorescent light above the register buzzed. Had been buzzing for 3 weeks. Earl had mentioned it to Frank twice. Frank had nodded twice. The light kept buzzing. Earl kept wiping. He was 62 years old. Broad through the shoulders. Soft around the middle in a way he had stopped fighting somewhere around 60. His hands were the hands of a man who had worked with them his whole life. Thick at the knuckles. A scar across the left palm, from a knife that slipped 20 years ago in a kitchen that was nothing like this one. Gray at the temples. Gray in the short beard he kept trimmed more out of habit than vanity. He did not look like a man who belonged behind this counter. He knew that. Had always known it. But belonging and being were two different things. And Earl Whitfield had been standing behind this counter for 3 years now. 5 mornings a week. 5:45 to 2 in the afternoon. He unlocked the door. He brewed the first pot. He wiped down the counter with a rag that was always a little too damp. And he did not think about the kitchen he used to run. The one with the 12-burner range, and the walk-in that smelled like thyme, and cold butter, and something that used to feel like the future. He did not think about that. He thought about the electric bill sitting on the kitchen table at home. About whether Cody had eaten breakfast before school. About whether the left rear tire on his truck was as low as it looked yesterday, or whether he was just tired. Practical things. Safe things. Things that had answers. The bell above the door chimed at 6:02. Roberta came in first, unwinding a scarf that was too thick for October, but Roberta had always run cold. She was 41, and had worked the morning shift at Harlow Street for 6 years, and had opinions about everything, and shared all of them freely, and at volume. "It's cold," she announced. To no one in particular. "It's 54 degrees, Earl said. "That's cold." He did not argue. Roberta hung her scarf on the hook by the employee bathroom, and tied on her apron, and began restocking the sugar packets the way she always did, pulling out the empties, and dropping them on the counter for Earl to deal with because somehow in 6 years, that had become his job, without either of them agreeing to it. Ray came in 4 minutes later. Ray was 33 and thought he was funny. Sometimes he was. Mostly he was just loud. He slapped the counter twice, as he passed it, like greeting an old friend. "Morning, old man." "Morning, Ray. You look terrible." "I look the same as yesterday." "Yeah," Ray said, heading for the back. "That's what I said." Earl dropped the empty sugar packets in the trash. By 6:15 the café had its first regulars. Construction workers with coffee to go. A nurse finishing a night shift, who always ordered the same thing, and ate it fast, and left without making eye contact with anyone. 2 older men, who came every morning, and sat at the same table, and talked in voices Earl had never been able to make out, and had stopped trying to. The morning moved the way mornings at Harlow Street moved. Steady. Predictable. 1 order at a time. And then the door chimed again. Earl looked up. Out of habit. The way he always did. And something shifted. Not dramatically. Not the way things shifted in movies, with music and golden light. Just a woman. Walking in. Alone. Moving like she had practiced making herself small. Like shrinking was a skill she had worked at. She was somewhere around his age. Maybe younger. Hard to tell. She wore a dark jacket, the kind pulled from a donation bin, faded at the elbows, collar turned up against the cold she was carrying inside her, as much as out. Her hair was loose and unwashed, falling around a face that had once been, Earl suspected, the kind of face that stopped people. The kind that held a whole history in it, if you knew how to look. She did not look at anyone. She moved directly to the back corner of the café. The table by the window that looked out onto the alley. She sat down. She placed both hands flat on the surface like she was steadying herself against something. And then she just sat there. No phone. No book. No bag. No coffee. Just there. Roberta materialized at Earl's elbow. Who's that? Don't know. She going to order something? Earl watched the woman for a moment. She was looking out at the alley. The alley was not interesting. A dumpster. Oil-stained asphalt. A pigeon that came around most mornings looking for something that was never there. Give her a minute, Earl said. Roberta gave her 7. Then walked over, with her order pad, came back with an expression that said she had encountered something unpleasant. She's got 40 cents, Roberta said. Wants to know if that's enough for anything. Earl looked at the woman in the corner. She was not looking back. She was watching the pigeon. Give her the small drip, he said. Put it on my tab. Roberta stared at him. Your tab. My tab. Earl, you don't have a tab. Then start one. Roberta said something low, and went to pour the coffee. Earl watched her carry it to the corner table. Watched the woman look up. Accept the cup. Wrap both hands around it the instant it touched the table, like she needed the warmth more than the liquid. She did not smile. She nodded once. Small and careful. Earl turned back to the counter. He wiped it down. She came back the next morning. And the morning after that. And the one after that. Always the same time. Always the same table. Always the same dark jacket. Always the same careful way of moving through the room, like she was a guest in a place where she wasn't entirely sure of her welcome. On the 3rd morning she had 60 cents. On the 5th, $1 and some coins. Earl stopped tracking it after the first week. He just made sure there was a cup ready when she came in. Small drip. Sometimes a piece of wheat toast, if it was a slow morning, and there was extra from prep. He put it in front of her without ceremony. Without the pointed look that says, notice what I'm doing for you. Without explanation. He put it down. And walked away. Roberta noticed. Of course she did. You know she's not paying full price, Roberta said one morning, keeping her voice at the register volume that was meant to be quiet, but carried to anyone paying attention. I know. That's coming out of your pocket. I know that too. Earl. Roberta set down the coffee pot. Looked at him directly. You make $14 an hour. I'm aware. She's going to keep coming back. I know. And you're going to keep... Roberta gestured toward the corner. Yep. Roberta picked up the coffee pot. Shook her head. I don't understand you. Earl didn't say anything to that. because he didn't fully understand himself. He just knew that he had watched this woman sit at that table for 5 mornings running. Had watched her hold a coffee cup like it was the most valuable object she owned. Had watched her eat half a piece of toast, and wrap the other half in a napkin, and tuck it carefully into her jacket pocket. Something about that. The napkin. The careful folding. The pocket. It had gotten into him somewhere he couldn't name. Ray had his own analysis. "That woman gives me the creeps," he said one morning, restocking cups. "Something's off." "She's sitting in the corner drinking coffee," Earl said. "She doesn't drink it. She holds it. She's cold. It's 60 degrees. Some people run cold," Earl said. He thought of Roberta's scarf and almost smiled. "Almost." Ray lowered his voice. "You think she's, not all there?" Earl looked at him. Just looked. Long enough that Ray got uncomfortable, and went back to restocking the cups. "She's cold," Earl said again. "And hungry. That's all." Frank Odom discovered the arrangement on a Wednesday morning in the 3rd week. Frank came in most Wednesdays around 10, when the rush had thinned, and the café was manageable. He sat at the counter, and drank coffee, and looked at the numbers on his phone, and projected an air of ownership that was mostly performance. He was 56, and had bought Harlow Street 8 years ago, as an investment, and had never once worked a shift himself, and had strong opinions about operational efficiency for a man who couldn't work the espresso machine. He noticed the woman in the corner. He noticed everything that cost him money. "Who's that?" he asked Earl. "Regular customer." "What's she ordering?" Earl kept his eyes on the coffee he was pulling. "Small drip. Sometimes toast." "She paying?" "A beat. She pays what she can." Frank set his phone face down on the counter. That was never good. Phone face down meant he'd already made a decision. "Earl." "Frank. I run a business." "I know. A business where people pay for what they get." Earl said nothing. "That woman has been sitting at my table for 3 weeks," Frank said. "And in 3 weeks she's paid what, exactly?" "Still nothing." "I'm not a shelter," Frank said. "I like you, Earl. You're solid, you show up, you don't cause problems. But this," he gestured toward the corner, "this is a problem. If she can't pay, she can't stay. Handle it professionally." He picked up his phone. Conversation over. Frank left at 10:30. At 11, Earl went to the supply room and found the small inventory notepad. He wrote his name at the top. Drew a line under it. A tab. His personal tab for 1 cup of coffee, and occasionally some toast for a woman, whose name he did not yet know. He put the notepad in the drawer under the register. The next morning, when she sat down at her corner table, Earl brought her coffee. And toast. Buttered. Cut into pieces, because he had noticed the 2nd week that her hands sometimes shook. He paid for it himself. He did not tell anyone. The cold made itself known on a Thursday in late October. She came in later than usual. Wet, not just damp. The jacket was soaked through and her hair stuck flat against the sides of her face, and her hands, when she sat down and reached for the butter knife, would not cooperate. The knife slipped. Clattered on the plate. She grabbed for it, and knocked it sideways instead. She stared at her hands. The specific way you stare at something that has failed you. Earl picked up the knife. He buttered the toast. He cut it into smaller pieces than usual. He set the plate back in front of her the way he would have in a professional kitchen, without comment, without production, because in a real kitchen things got done, and no one performed the doing. She looked up. Her eyes were wet. Could have been rain. Wasn't entirely rain. "Thank you," she said. Her voice surprised him. He'd expected something rougher. Something that matched the jacket and the tangled hair. But she sounded like someone who had learned to use words carefully. Like someone who had once spoken to rooms full of people and had since been saving words for the moments that required them. "You're welcome," Earl said. She held his eyes for a moment. Then she picked up a piece of toast and ate it. He went back to the counter. Wiped it down. Left to right. Something had shifted between them. Small and quiet. Without announcement. Like a door that had been stuck finally giving a little on its hinges. Not open. Not yet. Just looser than before. She started talking to him in November. Small things. How was the morning? Was it busy? Had the rain stopped yet? Questions that asked very little of him, which he understood was intentional. She was testing weight. So was he. He learned her name on a Tuesday in the second week of November. She had wrapped her hands around her coffee and, without looking up, said, "I'm Celestine." He waited a moment. "Earl." She nodded. Like that settled something that had been unsettled. He did not push for more. She did not offer more. They lived in that careful balance for another week. 2. And slowly, the way things happen between people who are both comfortable with silence, the conversation stretched. A question became an answer. An answer became another question. Something that was, if you weren't paying close attention, actual conversation. She asked how long he'd worked at Harlow Street. 3 years, he said. Before that? He had been wiping down the table near hers. He stopped. Just for a second. Different kitchen. She looked at him. Something still and attentive in her expression. Better? Different, he said. She seemed to understand that he meant yes. Then came the morning Cody was there. The babysitter had cancelled at 5:17 in the morning. The text came, while Earl was already in the truck, already halfway to the café. He couldn't afford to miss the shift. Couldn't leave an 8-year-old home alone. So there was no good option. Only the least bad one. Cody sat at the end of the counter, with a coloring book and a box of crayons. He was a serious child. He applied himself to coloring, with the intensity other kids saved for running in circles. He had his grandfather's eyes, and his mother's mouth, and the patience of a kid who had understood early that the adults around him were doing their best with what they had. He sat. He colored. He didn't complain. Earl felt the particular guilt of a man who had raised a son to do better, watching himself fall short for his grandson. A cafe at 6 in the morning was no place for an 8-year-old. This was not what Cody deserved. Celestine came in at her usual time. She walked to her corner. Sat down. Earl brought the coffee. She wrapped her hands around it. The ordinary choreography of an ordinary morning. Except then she looked up. She saw Cody at the counter. Her eyes settled on him, with the particular attention of someone who had been starved of ordinary life for a long time, and found even the smallest version of it worth examining completely. She stood up. Earl watched her cross the cafe. Watched her stop near Cody, and look at what he was coloring. "Is that a T-Rex?" she asked. Cody looked up. He was very good at distinguishing real questions from polite ones. "Brachiosaurus," he said. "The neck goes up more." Celestine studied the drawing. "I can see that now. You're right." Cody went back to coloring. Satisfied. Then Celestine reached for a napkin from the dispenser on the counter. She didn't ask. She just started folding. Her hands moved slowly, not from uncertainty but from care. The deliberate slowness of someone who had done this many times and was taking pains not to rush it. Cody's crayon stopped. He watched. The napkin found its shape. Angles and tucks, and a form that wasn't obvious, until suddenly it was. She placed it on the counter in front of him. A bird. Small. Perfect. White paper napkin. Cody stared at it the way children stare at things that seem impossible. "How did you do that?" "I can show you," Celestine said. She sat down on the stool beside him. She took another napkin. She started again, slowly, describing each fold, with quiet precision. Cody leaned in. The crayon was forgotten. The brachiosaurus was forgotten. He was entirely present the way children are entirely present, when something genuinely captures them. Earl stood behind the counter and watched. Watched his grandson lean toward this woman. Watched her hands move. Watched Cody's tongue appear at the corner of his mouth the way it always did, when he was concentrating. He didn't know what to do with what he felt. It wasn't one thing. It was several things arriving at once. Something warm. Something with an edge to it. Like finding something you'd forgotten you'd misplaced. Cody held up his first attempt. Lopsided. One wing distinctly longer than the other. Triumphant. And then, because Cody was 8 years old, and had no working filter. How come you look sad? Celestine's hands went still. She looked at Cody. For a long time. The length of time adults use, when they are deciding how honest to be, with a child, who has asked an honest question. I'm not sad right now, she said quietly. Cody accepted that. Turned back to his napkin. That was enough for him. A complete answer. But Earl saw Celestine's face in the moment, after she said it. Something moved through it, that was not pain, and not relief. Something between those two things. Like a word you have been searching for, and been given by someone, who didn't know they were giving it. He went to the back. Stood by the coffee machine. Let the steam hit his face. That morning. The napkin bird. The lopsided wings. Cody's honest question. Celestine's careful answer. He would mark it later, as the day he stopped seeing her, as a woman, who needed help. She was a person. Full. With a before. And he had been, so occupied with managing the practicalities, that he had nearly missed it. He went back out. He wiped down the counter. She was teaching Cody a second fold. Cody was destroying it cheerfully, and starting over. Earl watched them for a while. Then he got back to work. She missed 5 days in the first week of December. The first day he told himself she'd be in tomorrow. The second he made the coffee anyway. Set it on the table. Watched it go cold. The third day Roberta saw him do it, and said nothing, which was, from Roberta, practically a statement. By the fourth day Ray had something to offer. Maybe she moved on, he said. Cheerful. The way Ray offered everything. Found a different spot. Or just, moved on. Earl looked at him. Something in that look made Ray add. I just mean she's probably fine. I know what you meant, Earl said. He went to the back. Stood in the walk-in for a few minutes. Let the cold settle around him. He had spent years of his life in walk-ins. There was something about the cold, and the closed space, and the complete quiet. It made being honest with himself easier. He was worried. He didn't know her last name. Didn't know where she slept. He knew the alley her table looked out onto. He knew her voice. He knew the way she held a cup. He knew she wrote in a small notebook, with a cover that was falling apart. He knew she folded napkins into birds. He knew she asked good questions, and actually listened to the answers. He did not know nearly enough. And now she was gone. He went back out. Made the coffee. Set it on the table. Watched it go cold. That night he walked through the neighborhood. He told himself he was just getting air. The kind of thing a man his age did, when he needed to think. He walked past the bus stops. The park. The stretch of shuttered storefronts on the east side of Harlow, that had been closed for years, and were only beginning to be talked about, as something that might become something. He did not find her. He went home. Cody was at the kitchen table, with third-grade math, which was not as simple as Earl remembered it being. They worked through it together. Earl made dinner. Canned soup and the good bread, from the bakery 2 blocks over, because some nights you needed at least one thing that was genuinely good. After Cody was asleep, Earl sat on the couch and looked at nothing. He thought about the napkin birds lined up on the counter. About Cody's first crooked attempt that had gone home on the nightstand. About the way she'd said "I'm not sad right now," the word now doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence. Like right now was the thing she was holding on to. He thought about what Ray had said. Maybe she moved on. He hoped that was true. He didn't believe it. He did not sleep well. She came back on the 6th day. He was restocking the napkin dispensers, which felt appropriate, in retrospect, when the door chimed. He looked up, because he always looked up now, when the door chimed. She was there. Different from before, in a way, that was visible. The same jacket, the same careful way of moving. But something beneath the surface had changed. She was thinner. The jacket hung differently. The circles under her eyes were deeper, and the set of her shoulders was the set of someone who had been holding something heavy for a long time, and was genuinely unsure how much longer they could manage. But she was there. She walked to her corner. Sat down. Both hands flat on the table. Earl made the coffee. Cut the toast. Brought both over, without speaking because he did not trust himself to find the right words, and silence had always served him better than the wrong ones. She looked up at him. Her lips moved, and nothing came out for a moment. Then, "Thank you?" Quieter than usual. Like it cost her something. Earl nodded. Started to turn away. "For the coffee," she said. "While I was gone." He stopped. Turned back. "You kept making it," she said. "Roberta told me. She said you were wasting food?" Something that was almost a smile, but not quite. She said it in a way that was complaining. But I think she meant it differently. Earl looked at her. "How do you know what I meant?" "Because wasted food genuinely bothers Roberta," Celestine said. So she noticed. Which means it mattered to her. Which means it meant something. Earl had nothing to say to that. He went back to the counter. He wiped it down. Left to right. She drank her coffee slowly. Both hands around the cup. And the morning moved forward the way it always moved. Predictably. One moment at a time. Except Earl kept looking up. Later in the morning, after the rush thinned, and the café settled into its mid-morning quiet, he was clearing the table beside hers. She had the notebook out. Writing. The cramped, careful handwriting he noticed before. Too many words and too little space, like she was afraid of running out of pages. She didn't look up when he came close. He said, "You okay?" She stopped writing. Closed the notebook. Both hands flat on top of it, the way she always anchored her hands to flat surfaces. Like she needed the ground. "I'm fine," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. "I'm fine," she said again. Then, before he could respond, "Why do you keep doing this?" "The coffee. The toast." She held his eyes. "What do you get out of it?" Earl thought about it. Genuinely. Because she was asking genuinely, and she deserved a genuine answer. "Nothing," he said. "I don't get anything out of it." Celestine was quiet for a long moment. "That's the most wrong, and most right answer I've ever heard," she said. He didn't know what to say to that. So he nodded. And he went back to the counter. He wiped it down. Left to right. Right to left. And he thought about what she'd said for the rest of the shift. Through the drive home. Through dinner with Cody, and the homework, and the canned soup. He was still thinking about it, when he turned off the light. The most wrong, and most right answer I've ever heard. He didn't know what she meant. He wasn't sure she did either. But it stayed, with him the way things that matter tend to stay. Quietly. Without asking permission. December deepened. Atlanta cold was not dramatic cold. It was persistent cold. The kind that settled into the joints, and lived in the gaps around window frames, and arrived in the mornings like something that had always been there. Earl wore the heavier jacket to work. The fleece-lined one he'd bought the winter, after Carol died, and had worn every cold season, since because she had helped him pick it out at a store on Peachtree. He was aware that was sentimental. He was also 62 years old, and had stopped pretending sentiment didn't count. Carol. He thought about her most in December. The cold brought her back. She had loved December the way some people love difficult things, fully, without apology, knowing it cost something. 4 years. 4 years since the hospital. Since the house got quiet in a way it had never been quiet before and never entirely stopped being. His son had offered to come back. Earl had said no, because it was the right thing to say, and also because watching someone else grieve in his kitchen would have been more than he could hold. Cody had come 18 months later, when his son's job moved him to Houston, and the math of distance, and a second grader didn't work. Earl had said yes to that immediately. Because Cody needed him. And because, if he was being honest, the kind of honest only available in walk-ins, with the cold, and the quiet, he needed Cody too. The boy kept the house, from being only an absence. Celestine came in on a Thursday in the second week of December, moving differently than usual. Slower. Like each step required a separate decision. She sat down, and did not reach for the coffee right away. Just sat with her hands in her lap, looking out at the alley. Earl watched from behind the counter. He waited. After a few minutes she wrapped her hands around the cup. He exhaled without knowing he'd been holding it. He went over to wipe the table next to hers. They both understood he wasn't cleaning that table. "Rough morning?" he said. She considered the word. "Rough few days." He kept wiping. "Eat anything today?" She didn't answer. That was the answer. He went to the kitchen. He came back, with a real plate, eggs soft scrambled, 2 strips of bacon, the wheat toast she usually had. He set it in front of her. She stared at it. "Earl, you don't have to say anything," he said. "Just eat." The expression that moved across her face was complicated in the way that comes from receiving something you needed, from someone with no obligation to give it. She picked up the fork. He went back to the counter. Ray appeared at his elbow. "You cooked for her?" "I put in an order." "You cooked it yourself?" "I was back there. I used to be a cook." Ray looked at the corner table, then back at Earl. Something moved through his expression that was not his usual performance. Something closer to respect briefly, before he covered it. "Whatever," he said and went back to work. Roberta watched the corner table for a moment, and then went back to what she'd been doing. Which from Roberta was practically an ovation. She asked him about the cooking in the third week of December. Not about Carol, not yet. About the cooking itself. She had been moving sideways toward things for weeks. This was how she worked. She gave things room to retreat, before she came close. She asked what he liked to cook. He told her. Southern food. The kind that took time. Braises and slow things. Stocks that went for hours. Food that required patience and attention and rewarded both. "And now you make coffee," she said. Not a judgment. An observation. But the kind that was also a question. "Now I make coffee," he said. "What changed?" He was quiet for a moment. "My wife died," he said. "4 years ago." He did not dress it up. Dressing it up made it heavier, not lighter. "She was the reason I cooked. Not the only reason, I always loved it. But she was a big part of it. And then it stopped being what it had been." Celestine was quiet for a long time. "Are you afraid," she said finally, "that if you go back to it, it won't be the same? That it'll just prove to you how much is gone?" He stared at her. Because that was it. The thing he'd been walking around for 4 years, without knowing its shape. 62 years old, and it had taken a woman sitting in the corner of a small café, with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup to say the thing he'd never managed to say to himself. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Celestine nodded. "I understand that," she said quietly. Being afraid that the thing you love will just become evidence of what you've lost. He wanted to ask what she loved. What she had lost. He did not ask. Because she had given him something private, and he was not going to take more than what was offered. He just nodded. And they sat with that for a while. Two people in the corner of a small café in December, not saying anything. Which was its own kind of conversation. The night he walked through the neighborhood the second time, it was colder. She hadn't come in for 3 days. He was not panicking. He was telling himself he was not panicking. He was simply alert. The way you are alert when something you've been tracking goes quiet. He left the cafe after his shift and went south. Toward the older part of the neighborhood, where the buildings wore their age without apology. He passed the shuttered laundromat. The corner store, with the handwritten sign in the window. The lot where something had burned 2 years ago, and nothing new had been built. He found her on Clement Street. Sitting on the steps of a building that had been empty 5 years, a conversion project that had run out of money halfway through. She had the notebook open on her knee. She was writing in the dark, or as close to dark as the streetlight allowed. Her breath made small clouds in the cold air. Earl stopped on the sidewalk. Maybe 30 feet away. She did not see him. He stood there. Watched her write. Watched the careful movement of the pen. Watched her push her hair out of her face with one hand and keep writing with the other. She was okay. Cold and outside in December, and writing on the steps of an empty building, but okay. That was what he had needed to know. He turned around. He walked home. He was at the gate of his house when he thought, just briefly, about the possibility that she had seen him. That she had looked up at some point while he was standing there. He did not let himself think about that for long. He went inside. Made tea. Stood at the kitchen window and drank it and looked at the cold yard and the tree Carol had planted the first spring they were in the house. 32 years ago. It was enormous now. The way things become enormous, if you give them enough time. He thought about Celestine. About what it cost a person to live the way she was living. And what it took, day after day, to keep showing up anyway. She kept showing up. He thought about himself. About what it cost, for years after losing Carol, to keep unlocking the cafe at 5:45. To make the first pot. To wipe down the counter with a rag that was always a little too damp. Maybe that was what they had in common. Not the grief, necessarily. Not the details. Just the showing up. The stubborn, unglamorous act of continuing. He finished his tea. He went to bed. In the morning he made the first pot. He cut the toast. He set it on the table in the corner. She came in at 6:52. She looked at the coffee on the table. She looked at him across the room. He nodded. She sat down. She wrapped both hands around the cup. And the morning continued the way mornings continued. Predictably. One moment at a time. What do you get out of it? She had asked him. Nothing, he had said. But standing behind the counter that morning, watching her warm her hands on a cup of coffee he had made, and set out on a table he had kept ready for 3 days, he thought that nothing was not quite the right word. Not nothing. Just nothing he could name yet. And sometimes that was enough to keep going. January came in cold and stayed that way. Not the dramatic cold of somewhere north. Atlanta cold was different. It found the joints and lived there. It settled into the walls of old buildings, and came through the gaps in window frames that nobody had gotten around to sealing. It was the kind of cold that didn't announce itself. Just moved in. Like a guest, who stopped asking permission somewhere along the way. Earl felt it in his left knee every morning now. The one he'd had scoped 15 years ago. The surgeon had told him it would give him trouble eventually. Eventually had shown up. It arrived at 5:15, when he swung his legs off the bed and put weight on the floor, and the knee said, without sympathy, "Here we are." He stretched it. Made coffee. Checked on Cody. Same as every morning. Cody was 8, and slept like someone had switched him off. Flat on his back. Arms wide. The coloring book on the nightstand. And beside it, a row of napkin birds he'd been adding to without explanation. 7 of them now. Earl had no idea when he was practicing. Just kept finding new ones. Everything was getting a little harder. Earl noticed it in small increments. The drive felt longer. The shift felt longer. The space between the counter and the tables felt further, not in any measurable way. Just further. He had felt this before. 3 years into the restaurant. Before Carol. When the hours had begun to outweigh the reasons. The particular weight of a life that had stopped moving forward. He didn't say any of this to anyone. He wiped the counter. Made the coffee. Cut the toast. Frank cut his hours in the second week of January. No warning. Frank did not operate in warnings. He operated in decisions that were already made by the time you heard about them. He called Earl into the office on a Monday. Set his phone face down on the desk. "I'm restructuring the morning shifts," Frank said. Earl waited. "Efficiency. Trimming the overstaffed areas." "We're not overstaffed," Earl said. "I'm trimming anyway." Frank. 40 to 28. Starting next week. 40 to 28. 12 hours. Gone. $380 a month, give or take. Earl did the math without wanting to. That was the electric bill. That was most of Cody's school lunches for a month. That was the difference between getting by and not. "This about the woman?" Earl said. Frank looked at him. "It's about efficiency." Frank. "It's about efficiency, Earl." Earl looked at the desk. The phone lying face down. The coffee ring, from a cup Frank had never poured himself. "Understood," he said. He walked out. He did not go to the walk-in. He went to the bathroom, and ran cold water over his wrists, the way Carol used to tell him to do when he was angry. Something about the pulse points. She had read it somewhere. It worked. Or at least it gave his hands something to do that wasn't going through a wall. He dried his hands. He went back to the counter. The second job came through a cousin's connection. A sports bar on the north side. Part-time closer, 3 nights a week. Pouring drinks until midnight. Cleaning up until 1. Home by 1:30 if traffic cooperated. Earl took it. He told Cody he was picking up some extra work. Cody was 8, and accepted this, without comment, the way he accepted things adults told him, not quite fully, but without the vocabulary, yet to say what he actually thought. What he thought showed in other ways. Like how he started setting the table for dinner, without being asked. Small thing. Earl noticed every time. The schedule, Harlow Street, 5:45 to 2. Home by 2:15. Rest until 3 if the knee allowed. Cody from after school at 4. Dinner. Homework. Cody to bed at 8:30. Out the door at 9:15. Bar until 1:30. Home. 4 hours of sleep on bar nights, if things went well. 5:15 alarm. Do it again. He lost 9 pounds in January without trying. His hands had a faint tremor by the end of bar shifts that went away after 6 hours of sleep, but 6 hours was not something he was reliably getting. The knee was worse. The distances felt longer. He kept making Celestine's coffee. He kept cutting the toast. Because that was the thing that made the least sense, and the most at the same time. In a schedule that had compressed to pure function, wake, work, maintain, sleep, repeat, those 4 minutes in the morning were the 4 minutes that felt like a choice. His choice. Not Frank's. Not the bar owner's. Not the electric company's. His. So he kept doing it. She noticed. Of course she noticed. He had understood early that Celestine watched things. Carefully, quietly, the way people watch, when they've learned the world reveals more, if you stay still than if you move. She noticed the second job on the third week of January. He'd come in still wearing the bar shirt under his Harlow Street apron, running late, changed fast, missed it. She looked at the collar. Said nothing. The next morning she looked at his eyes instead. Still said nothing. On the fourth morning she said, "You're not sleeping." "I sleep fine, Earl. I sleep adequately." She looked at him, over the top of her coffee cup. "Those are different things." He couldn't argue with that. "Second job?" she asked. He shrugged. Which was a yes. She looked down at her coffee. Something moved across her face, a shadow he couldn't read cleanly. Not pity. He would have recognized pity, and ended the conversation. Something more complicated. Something that looked, if he had to name it, like guilt. But that didn't make sense. So he filed it away. The check fell on a Tuesday in the third week of January. Celestine was getting her notebook from her jacket pocket. The pocket was full, notebook, a folded piece of paper, other things. She pulled the notebook free, and something came with it. Fluttered out. Landed on the floor between her table and the next one. Earl was wiping down that adjacent table. He saw it before she did. He picked it up. He was already turning to hand it back when he looked at it. Not a receipt. Not a sheet of notebook paper. A check. Torn in half. Torn carefully, the kind of tearing done with intention rather than anger. The two halves sitting nearly aligned. Enough to read most of it. The bank name across the top, Hargrove Private Wealth Management. He didn't know that bank. But he understood what it was. Private. Managed. The kind of banking that existed at a remove from ordinary life. The account number was obscured by the tear. The amount was gone with the other half. What remained was the header, the signature line, and 3 words in small print at the bottom. Beneficiary disbursement confirmation. He handed it back. He said nothing. He kept his face neutral the way he had learned to keep it neutral in professional kitchens, where the ability to show nothing you didn't choose to show was a genuine survival skill. Celestine took the halves from him. She looked at his face. Whatever she was looking for, she didn't find it. Or she found exactly what she expected. She put the check in her pocket. "Thank you," she said. "Of course," he said. He went back to wiping the table. Very thoroughly. Private wealth management. Beneficiary disbursement. He turned those words over while his hands moved automatically across the laminate. He was not going to ask. He had not earned that information, and he was not the kind of man who took what he hadn't earned. But he thought about the worn jacket. The 40 cents. The way she held the cup. The careful folding of the napkins. The notebook. And then that check. "I don't understand anything," he thought. Which was different from thinking he needed to. Simone arrived on a Thursday morning in February. Earl was clearing the table 2 down from Celestine's when the door opened. He looked up from habit. He didn't know her. But she was not a Harlow Street person. That was clear in the first few seconds. The coat was cashmere. The shoes were not made for these floors. She scanned the room, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent their life in rooms that required assessment. Her eyes landed on Celestine. Something complicated happened in her face. Relief and frustration arriving at exactly the same moment, which is an uncomfortable thing to wear. She crossed the café directly. Didn't sit. Stood at the edge of Celestine's table, and bent slightly at the waist, and spoke in a voice designed to be quiet, but that carried, to Earl, 2 tables over, with the cloth moving over a spot he'd already cleaned twice. "Celestine. We need to talk about the timeline. Desmond says if the disbursement papers aren't signed before the end of the month, the secondary trust goes into probate review. That's 6 months minimum." Earl kept wiping. He did not look up. "The attorneys have been patient," the woman continued. "Daddy's estate has been in holding for nearly 2 years. There are obligations. Staff. People waiting on decisions that only you can make. Simone. Celestine's voice was quiet and absolutely final. Silence. I'll come when I'm ready, Celestine said. A longer silence. Celestine. When I'm ready. The woman named Simone straightened. She looked around the café, the slow, deliberate look of someone deciding how much to care about their surroundings. Her eyes passed over Earl. Moved on. Then she left. The door closed. Earl kept wiping the table. His hand moved. His face did nothing. He could feel Celestine not looking at him, from 2 tables away. He could feel it like a temperature change. She knew he had heard. She was deciding something. He finished with the table. Picked up the cloth. Walked back to the counter. He did not ask. He put the cloth under the counter. He made himself a coffee, and stood there, and drank it, and assembled quietly what he had just heard. Disbursement papers. Secondary trust. Probate review. Attorneys. Daddy's estate. Nearly 2 years. And the bank name on the torn check. Hargrove Private Wealth Management. He drank his coffee. The thing he thought he didn't understand, he was beginning to understand. Or at least its outline. Its approximate shape and weight. He looked at the corner table. Celestine had the notebook out. Writing. Her hand moved steadily. Like the conversation had not happened. Like Simone had never been in the room. But her jaw was set in a way he had not seen before. And her coffee had gone untouched, and was going cold. He made her a fresh one. Walked it over. Set it down without a word. Picked up the cold one. She looked up. Thank you, she said. He nodded. He walked away. She didn't explain. He didn't ask. That was still the arrangement between them. Some things didn't need to be explained. They just needed someone to be present for them. He had been present. That was enough. She disappeared for 8 days in February. He counted them the way you count days you didn't agree to wait. 1, 2. Fine. 3, 4. Getting longer. 5, 6. The hollow that opens, when something you've gotten used to is suddenly absent. 7. 8. He kept making the coffee. Kept cutting the toast. Set both on the table every morning. They went cold. The toast went stale. He threw them out at the end of each shift, and told himself he'd stop the next day, and did not stop. Roberta watched him do it on day 4. She didn't say anything. Which he'd come to understand was Roberta's actual language. The things she cared about, she went quiet for. Ray had less restraint. Day 6. Mid-morning. The café at its usual low hum. 8 days, Ray said. He was wiping down the bar. Not looking at Earl. That's a long time. Earl said nothing. Maybe she moved on. Found somewhere else. Earl moved a coffee cup from one side of the counter to the other. Set it down. Or maybe she's just... Ray shrugged. Fine. Taking a break. Earl put both hands flat on the counter. Ray, he said. Ray looked over. Don't. 2 letters. But Ray heard everything in them. The tiredness. The warning. The thing underneath both, that was rawer than either. He was smart enough to leave it alone. Yeah, Ray said. Okay. He went back to the bar. Roberta, across the room, said nothing. Earl stood with his hands flat on the counter. Breathing. Steady. He was 62 years old, and he had buried a wife, and raised a son, and was raising a grandson, and he knew the difference between worry that was reasonable and worry that was excessive. This was reasonable. This was what came from actually paying attention to a person. From knowing, not guessing, knowing that she had nowhere warm to go. 8 days. February. Atlanta. He finished his shift. He walked south. He checked Clement Street. The steps were empty. He checked the park on 5th. Empty. The bus shelter on Harlow and 9th. A man on the bench wrapped in a moving blanket. Not her. He walked for 40 minutes, and did not find her, and went home. Cody was at the kitchen table. Fractions, which Cody found personally offensive. They worked through it together. After, Cody looked at him across the table. Carol's directness. Arriving in the eyes first. "Is it the paper bird lady?" Cody said. Earl looked at him. "She hasn't been at the café. You have the face you make when something's wrong, but you won't say what." Earl did not know what to do with the fact that an 8-year-old could read him that precisely. He filed it under things to examine later. "She hasn't come in for a few days," he said. "Is she okay?" Earl was quiet. "Grandpa. I don't know, buddy." He said it straight. Because Cody was 8, and he could take straight. "I hope so." Cody thought about it. Folded a piece of notebook paper, while he was thinking. Not into anything. Just folding and unfolding. "She'll come back," he said. "I think she's the kind of person who comes back." Earl looked at his grandson. 8 years old. Certain, in the particular way of children, about things adults spent entire lifetimes being uncertain of. "Yeah," Earl said. "I think so too. She came back on the 9th day." He was restocking napkin dispensers, the same napkins Cody used for his birds, when the door chimed. He looked up, because he always looked up now. She was there. Different. Not a little different. The kind of different that 8 days can make in a person already living close to the edge. Thinner in a way that was visible. The jacket hung differently. The circles under her eyes had the look of something that had settled in permanently. She moved through the door, and across the room, with the careful deliberateness of someone managing a body that was not fully cooperating. She sat down. Both hands on the table. Earl stood still for a moment. Then he made the coffee. Cut the toast. Brought both over. He stood there after setting them down. He had been walking away for months, and it had been the right call, that system of presence without intrusion. He was certain of it. Except this was different. She was holding herself together, with visible effort, and the coffee was in front of her, and she hadn't touched it. He pulled out the chair across from her. He sat down. She looked at him. Surprised. In all the weeks he'd known her, he had never sat at her table. He didn't explain. He just said, "Are you okay?" She looked at him. The way she looked, when she was deciding how true to be. "No," she said. One word. Clean. No apology with it. He waited. "I have a heart condition," she said. "I've known for about 14 months. The doctors are clear about what it means. About the timeline." She paused. "I didn't want to tell you. Because I didn't want you to treat me differently. You were the one thing that was just consistent. You made the coffee. You cut the toast. You didn't look at me like I was already somewhere else." She looked down at the cup. "I needed something that was just ordinary." Earl sat with that. He was good at silence. He had learned it in kitchens, the quiet that happens when everyone in the room is focused on the same thing, and there is nothing to add. Then he said, "I'm not going to treat you differently." She looked up. "I'm going to keep making the coffee. I'm going to keep cutting the toast. If you want to talk about it, you can. If you don't, that's fine." He paused. "But I'm not going to pretend I didn't hear it." She looked at him for a long time. The expression on her face was the most complicated thing he had ever tried to read. Not quite relief. Not quite grief. Somewhere between them, in the territory that has no clean name. The territory of being truly seen, and not running from it. "Thank you," she said. He stood up. He went to the kitchen. He came back, with a bowl of soup, the real kind, from the pot he had started bringing in, from home in January, because the café food was not enough, and this was, within his control to change. He set it in front of her. She picked up the spoon. He went back to the counter. He didn't wipe it down. He just stood there. Let the weight of the last 10 minutes settle. She had a heart condition. A timeline. And she had been coming to this cafe every morning, sitting in that corner, holding that cup, asking him about Carol, and cooking and what he would do if he had a chance to start over again. She had been doing all of that knowing. He thought about the courage of that. The specific quiet courage of continuing to show up at a corner table, when you know the clock is running, and not in your favor. Of making yourself present in the small, warm, ordinary moments. Of asking another person about their dreams, when you are running short on time to see your own. That courage. He thought about it for a long time. Frank came in on the last Wednesday of February. He went straight to the office. Texted Earl to come in. Earl untied his apron. Set it on the counter. Went to the office. Frank behind his desk. Phone face down. Sit down, Earl. Earl sat. 3 customer complaints, Frank said. In the last month. About the woman in the corner. 3 customers complained about a woman sitting in the corner drinking coffee. 3 customers said it made them uncomfortable. Earl looked at the desk. The phone. The coffee ring, from a mug Frank had never made himself. I need you to ask her to find somewhere else, Frank said. No, Earl said. Frank blinked. Earl. No. You understand what I understand exactly what you're saying. Earl kept his voice level. And the answer is no. Frank looked at him the way you look at something you thought you understood, and are revising. Then I need to ask whether this position is still the right fit. Earl sat with that for a moment. He thought about the 2 jobs. The knee. The 9 pounds. The 4 hours of sleep on bar nights. The electric bill. Cody's lunches. The buffer between getting by and not. He thought about all of it. Then he reached up and unpinned the Harlow Street button from his apron. He set it on Frank's desk. Then I guess it isn't, he said. He stood up. Walked out of the office. Walked through the cafe. He did not look at the corner table. He picked up his jacket from the hook by the back door and walked out into the February cold. He stood on the sidewalk. The cold hit him immediately. His knee throbbed. His hands were empty. No job. A bar shift tonight that would keep the lights on for another week. After that, math he did not want to do. He stood there for a full minute. And then, for the first time in 4 years, he thought about the kitchen. Not the memory of it. Not the grief of it. The actual kitchen. The 12-burner range. The walk-in smelling like thyme and cold butter. The feeling of something coming together under your hands that had not existed before. The thought arrived clean. Without Carol's weight attached to it. Just the kitchen. Just the cooking. Just the thing itself. He stood there with it. It didn't hurt the way he'd expected. It just felt like something that had been waiting. Patient. The way things that belong to you wait. He put his hands in his pockets. He walked home. That night, after Cody was asleep, Earl sat at the kitchen table, with a cup of tea that went cold, while he was thinking. He answered the question Celestine had asked him in December. The one he had not answered then. To himself. In the quiet kitchen. The sound of the city outside the window. Yes. I was afraid. I have been afraid for 4 years. And the fear cost me the kitchen, and it cost me Carol twice. Once, when she died, and once every day I didn't cook, because I couldn't face what cooking, without her, would prove. That was the math. It was not good math. He thought about Celestine. About the timeline she was living inside. About what it took to sit down at a corner table every morning, and hold a coffee cup, and ask a man she barely knew about his dreams like the answer genuinely mattered. Because maybe it did. Maybe watching someone else be afraid to live was its own particular grief. He sat there for a long time. Then he got up. He went to the pantry. Canned tomatoes. Dried pasta. An onion going soft at the edges. A heel of Parmesan. dried oregano. He stood at the stove. He turned on the burner. He cooked. Nothing special. Pasta. Red sauce from scratch, because that was the only kind worth making. He moved around the kitchen, with the efficiency of a man who had spent decades in professional kitchens, and for whom the movements were still stored in the body, in the muscle, and the hand, in the part of the brain that knows before the rest of you does. He cooked. And it hurt. Carol was in every motion. In the way he reached for the wooden spoon. In the smell of garlic going into oil. In the sound of the sauce beginning to bubble, which was a sound she had loved, which she had called the sound of something happening. Something happening. He cooked through the hurt. Not around it. Through. When it was done, he sat at the kitchen table and ate from a chipped bowl. Pasta and red sauce. A glass of water. The city outside the window. It was not the same as before. It was different. Harder and simpler, and more painful, and more real. The version of the thing that existed now in this life, after the loss. The version that carried Carol, without being destroyed by her. He thought, I should have done this sooner. And then, better now than not at all. He washed the bowl. He went to bed. He was 62 years old. The door that had been locked, from the inside for 4 years, he could feel it, finally, beginning to open. The bar job kept the lights on. That was what Earl told himself in March. The lights are on. Cody has lunch money. The truck payment cleared. These were the metrics now. Not progress. Not forward movement. Just the basic maintenance of a life that was costing more than it was returning. He applied to 4 places in the first week, after Harlow Street. The first wanted someone with more recent front-of-house experience, which meant younger. Earl thanked the manager and drove home, without turning on the radio. The second called back, and then didn't call again. The third was a hotel kitchen. Morning prep. 5 a.m. The sous chef was 29, and moved like he owned every room he entered. He looked at Earl's hands. At the scar on the left palm. Said they'd be in touch. They were not in touch. The fourth place was a diner on the south side. The smell hit him, before he was fully through the door, grease, and coffee and the specific warmth of a kitchen that had been running all day, without stopping, every day, for decades. The owner was a woman in her 60s, who had been there 30 years, and looked like it, and did not apologize for either. She looked at his hands. She looked at his face. She said the morning cook had just quit, and she needed someone Tuesday through Saturday, 6 to 2. He said yes before she finished the sentence. She looked at him, over the top of her glasses. You sure? It's not glamorous. I've done glamorous, Earl said. I'm fine with honest. She put her hand out. He shook it. He started the following Tuesday. It was not the restaurant he had imagined. Not the 12-burner range. Not the walk-in, and the full service running at speed. It was a 6-burner flat top, and a fryer that needed recalibrating, and orders on handwritten paper tickets that occasionally smudged. But it was a kitchen. And every morning, when he walked in, and turned on the burners, and felt the heat come up, and heard the first sizzle of oil in the pan, something in him, that had been held at a certain fixed angle for 4 years began, very slightly, to shift. Like a door easing on its hinges. Just a little. But moving. He thought about Celestine every morning, when it happened. She asked the right question. She asked if I was afraid. And I was. And maybe the fear was the whole problem all along. He cooked. He picked up Cody. He made dinner. He sat at the kitchen table, after Cody was asleep, and he was too tired to be useful, and he did not feel hollow the way he'd felt hollow for 4 years. Tired. But tired from something. Tired in the right direction. That was different. That was everything. 3 weeks after he left Harlow Street, he drove past it. He was not going out of his way. The diner was 4 blocks north, and Harlow Street was on the route home, if he took the longer way. Which he did. Without exactly deciding to. He slowed at the corner. Looked through the window. Same café. The fluorescent light above the registers still buzzing. He could see the faint irregular flicker from the street. Of course nobody had fixed it. The corner table was empty. He kept driving. He told himself she had probably found somewhere else. She was a person who had been moving for 28 months. Moving from city to city, from corner table to corner table. Looking for something she had been unable to find, until she found it here. And now. He turned onto his street. He parked the truck. He sat in the driveway, with the engine off. The quiet of a neighborhood at 2:30 in the afternoon. He had a bad feeling. He had learned to trust bad feelings. 4 years of them. And the one he hadn't trusted, the one in the spring, before Carol's diagnosis, when something felt wrong, and he told himself he was being paranoid, that was the one he still thought about. So he had learned. Trust the feeling. Name it. Then decide. The feeling was, she is not okay. He got out of the truck. He went inside. He made coffee. He stood at the kitchen window, and drank it, and looked at the tree Carol had planted the first spring they were in the house. 32 years ago. It was enormous now. The way things you plant become enormous, if you give them enough time. He thought about Celestine. The notebook. The careful handwriting. The folded napkins. The questions she asked, better questions than most people asked in a lifetime, asked with the urgency of someone who understood that time was doing something specific, and not in her favor. He thought about the torn check. The private wealth management bank. The sister in the cashmere coat talking about estates, and trusts and attorneys, and nearly 2 years of waiting. He had kept those pieces separate. Filed them carefully apart, because putting them together meant something he wasn't ready to face. He put them together now. He stood at the window. He looked at the tree. Something cold moved through him that had nothing to do with the weather. The call came on a Thursday. He was at the diner. Mid-morning. The breakfast rush had thinned. He was breaking down the flat top, scraping it clean, with the methodical left-to-right motion that was different from wiping a counter, more resistance, more purpose, more honest effort. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Unknown number. Atlanta area code. He answered. Mr. Whitfield. Not a recording. A person. A woman's voice. Professional. The kind of voice trained to deliver things. Speaking, he said. My name is Loretta Gaines. I'm an attorney. I represent the estate of Celestine Broussard. A brief pause. I'm very sorry to tell you that Ms. Broussard passed away 5 days ago. Cardiac failure. She had been in hospice care for the last 3 weeks. Earl set down the scraper. He put his hand flat on the flat top. Still warm from the morning service. He stood there and let it hit him. All at once. He did not try to manage it, or keep it at a distance. She was gone. He had known. That was the hardest part. He had known in the way you know things, before you're permitted to know them. Had known every morning he drove past Harlow Street, and saw the empty corner table. Had known in the bad feeling in the driveway. Knowing hadn't made it lighter. Knowing just meant he had been carrying it, before he was officially allowed to. Mr. Whitfield. Gentle. Are you there? Yes, he said. I'm here. She left specific instructions. About you. I'd like to arrange a meeting at your earliest convenience. There are things she wanted you to have. Earl looked at the flat top. The scraper. The kitchen around him. The morning light, through the single window above the sink, the light that reminded him every day that he was back. That he was doing this again. When? He said. Whenever you're ready. She was very clear about that. She said to give you time. She said to give you time. Earl closed his eyes for a moment. Tomorrow, he said. I can meet tomorrow. The meeting was at a law office downtown. Not the flashy kind. The kind that had been there 30 years, and knew it didn't need to be. Dark wood. Real art. The kind of carpet purchased correctly. Loretta Gaines was in her 50s. Gray at the temples. The handshake of someone who had delivered difficult news for a long time, without becoming cold doing it. That was a real skill. Earl recognized it. Desmond Holt sat to her left. Younger. Precise. He held his folder the way you hold something, when you understand exactly what's in it. Earl sat across from them. He had worn the good jacket. The fleece-lined one. Carol's jacket. He didn't know why. He just had. Mr. Whitfield, Loretta said. First, I want to say on behalf of the estate that we are grateful you agreed to meet. And personally, what I know of what you did for Celestine means something. To her family and to us. Earl nodded. I'm going to give you information, Loretta said. Some of it will be difficult to hear. Not because it's bad news, but because it will change how you understand the last 9 months. He waited. Celestine Broussard was the eldest daughter of the Broussard family. If you're not familiar with the name, and there's no particular reason you would be, they are one of the oldest and most established families in the South. Real estate. Agricultural holdings. Several generations of significant financial interests. Loretta paused. At the time of her death, Celestine's personal estate was valued at approximately $1.2 billion. The room did not change. The carpet was still the carpet. The art was still on the walls. Loretta's hands were still on the table, and Desmond's folder was exactly where it had been. But something in Earl's perception of the room shifted. Tilted. Like a photograph hung slightly crooked, that you've looked at long enough to think was straight. $1.2 billion. He stopped. She had everything, Loretta said. And she chose to live as if she had almost nothing. For 28 months. Not because she lost it. Not because of illness, not initially. Because she needed to know something. Earl looked at her. 2 years before she came to Atlanta, Loretta said, Celestine lost her father. Her mother 6 months after that. Then she lost her engagement. Her fiancé left, when he understood the scope of what grieving her would require of him. A pause. She told me the most devastating part wasn't any single loss. It was realizing she couldn't tell who was real. Who was with her because of her. And who was there because of the Broussard name. The money. The position. Loretta held his eyes steadily. So she left. She gave her sister power of attorney for estate management. She took almost nothing. She lived as if she had almost nothing. And she paid attention to how people treated her. Earl sat with that. He thought about the 40 cents. The first morning. The carefully counted coins placed on the table. He thought about Roberta. About Ray. About Frank. About himself. She went to 6 cities before Atlanta. Loretta continued. 19 months total. Different neighborhoods. Different cafes. She was looking for the same thing in all of them. Someone who would see her, Earl said. Flat. Not a question. Loretta nodded. She didn't find it. Not until here. Earl looked at the table. 19 months. 6 cities. A woman with $1.2 billion sitting in worn-out jackets at corner tables, and confirming, place after place, that the thing she was looking for was much rarer than money, or the absence of it. And then Atlanta. Harlow Street. A 62-year-old man, with a damp rag, and a left knee, that didn't work right. Earl felt his throat tighten. He did not let his face do anything he didn't choose. She wrote about you, Desmond said. He opened the folder. Slid a page across the table. Frequently. In the journal she kept throughout this period. With the family's permission, we've excerpted some of what she wrote. We thought you should see it. Earl looked down. The handwriting was immediately familiar. The cramped, careful script he had watched filled the pages of a falling-apart notebook for 9 months. He read slowly. October. He bought me toast. He didn't say anything about it. He put it down and walked away. I don't know the last time someone gave me something, without needing me to acknowledge the giving. November. He sat down across from me today to ask if I was all right. Just sat down. No performance. He asked and waited, and accepted the answer I gave him. He's 62 years old, working 2 jobs, raising his grandson alone, and he still has room in his day to notice whether someone else is okay. I don't understand it. I don't want to understand it. I just want to keep watching it. December. He cooked for me today. He brought soup from home. In a container with a lid, which means he planned it. I don't know what to do with that. February. He lost his job because of me. I was at my table. He came out of Frank's office, and walked through the café, and didn't look at the corner table, and didn't look at Roberta, or Ray, and he picked up his jacket, and walked out. He stopped on the sidewalk, and put his hands in his pockets, and looked up for a moment. Then he walked away. He didn't look back. I have thought about that every day since. Earl stopped reading. He set the page down. He looked at the table for a long time. She had been there. She had watched him walk out. He hadn't known that. Hadn't known she had seen the whole thing. Running out of time to be ready. She had known. The whole time. The heart condition, and the timeline, and the hospice care, she had been managing all of it, while still showing up at Harlow Street every morning. Still asking him questions. Still teaching Cody to fold birds. Still sitting in the cold corner, with her hands around his coffee. He understood now why she had asked, "What would you do, if you had the chance to start over?" She hadn't been asking abstractly. She had been planning. "There's a letter," Loretta said. She reached into the folder, and produced an envelope. Cream-colored. Sealed. His name on the front in the familiar handwriting. She asked that you read it privately. When you're ready. She was very specific about that. Not here. When you're ready. Earl looked at the envelope. The letter is separate from. He began. Yes, Loretta said. Desmond placed a check on the table. Earl looked at it. $4 million. He looked at it the way you look at a number that does not belong to your life. That exists in some other register of reality entirely. Then Desmond placed a second envelope beside it. Thicker. Official. This is a deed, Desmond said. Commercial property. On Harlow Street. 3 blocks north of the café, where you worked. He folded his hands. Celestine purchased it 5 months ago. The title has been transferred to your name. Property taxes for the next 3 years are paid in full. There is no mortgage. There are no encumbrances. He paused. She purchased it the week after she first saw you spend your own money buying breakfast for her. Earl stared at the envelope. 5 months ago. Before Simone's visit. Before Frank cut his hours. Before the ultimatum. Before all of it. She had already seen. Already decided. She had been planning this, while he was wiping down the counter, and telling himself he wasn't getting anything out of it. Nothing. He had said nothing. And she had been sitting across from him planning his future. He picked up the deed envelope. Held it in both hands. A kitchen. Not the one he remembered. Not the one from before. A new one. His own. 3 blocks from where he had spent 3 years making other people's coffee. 3 blocks from the corner table, where she had sat and watched him, and written things down carefully, and decided something about him that he hadn't decided about himself yet. She said, Loretta continued carefully, that money is easy to spend. She had watched people receive money and lose it within a year. But she said a kitchen is a commitment. A kitchen forces you to decide. It forces you to actually do the thing instead of just intending to. Earl held the envelope, He thought about the door locked, from the inside. For years. He thought about standing at the stove in February. Pasta. Red sauce. An onion going soft at the edges. Something happening. Carol's words. The sound of something happening. He thought about Celestine asking, "Are you afraid?" And himself not answering. And her nodding. Like the silence was answer enough. Like she had already known. "Take your time," Loretta said. "With all of it. No schedule. No conditions. No deadline." A pause. "The only thing," she asked, "and it's not a legal requirement, just a request, is that you read the letter before you make any decisions." Earl put the letter in his inside jacket pocket. Against his chest. He shook Loretta's hand. He shook Desmond's. He walked out, through the lobby, and through the glass doors, and onto the March afternoon. He stood on the sidewalk. Cold still. But different from February cold. Less permanent. Like something that was beginning to think about leaving. He put his hand on his chest. Felt the envelope through the jacket. He walked to his truck. He drove home. Cody was at school. The house had the midday quiet of a place that usually had people in it, and held their shape when they were gone. Earl sat at the kitchen table. He took out the envelope. Looked at his name on the front. The careful letters. The pen pressed firmly enough to feel the indentation, from the other side. He opened it. One page. Both sides. The handwriting smaller than usual. Packed in, like she had things to say, and was running out of. He stopped that thought. He read. "Earl. I've been trying to write this for 3 months. I had drafts going back to November. None of them were right. They were all either too much, or not enough, and I kept thinking I would find the version that was exactly right, if I kept trying. But I'm running out of time for exactly right. So this is what I have. You saved my life. Not in the way people usually mean, when they say that. Not dramatically. I don't mean you pulled me out of a burning building. I mean something smaller than that and much harder to quantify. I came to Atlanta, after 19 months of being invisible. 19 months of sitting in corners, and watching people look through me. I was not depressed exactly. I was something worse. I was confirmed. City after city, I had confirmed what I was beginning to believe. That without the money, without the name, without the things that made people treat me as though I mattered, I didn't. I was easy to overlook. Easy to avoid. Easy to move past. I want to be honest with you. I had started to believe it. And then you put a cup of coffee in front of me. And you walked away. No performance. No pointed generosity. No expression that said, "Look what I'm doing." You put the coffee down, and went back to your counter, and wiped it down. Left to right. Every single morning. Do you know what that did? Not the coffee. The walking away. The complete absence of agenda. You gave me something, and you didn't stand there waiting for my gratitude. You just gave it and moved on. Like it was ordinary. Like I was ordinary. Like the whole thing was so natural it didn't require acknowledgement. I had not been ordinary in 20 years. You made me a person who sat in a corner and drank coffee and talked to a man named Earl about his day. And that specific ordinary thing was what I needed to understand, that I was still here. Still myself. Still worth the space I was taking up. I watched you walk out of that café. I was at my table. You couldn't see me from where you were. But I saw you. I saw you stop on the sidewalk, and put your hands in your pockets, and look up at the sky for a moment. And then you walked. You didn't look back. I have thought about that every day since. Not because it was dramatic. Because it wasn't. Because it was just a man who made a decision about who he was, and what he would and wouldn't do, and then he walked in the direction of that decision without looking back. No audience. No fanfare. Just the decision and then the walking. That is the rarest thing I have ever seen. I am leaving you money, because I want you to have a chance. The chance I had, to build something that is actually yours. Not someone else's kitchen. Not someone else's café. Yours. I listened to you talk about cooking, and I heard what you didn't say, and I understood that you stopped not because you lost the ability, but because you lost the reason. And I think the reason is coming back. I could see it in how you moved in the last weeks. Something was different. The property is not a gift. It is a starting point. What happens after that belongs entirely to you. I am not trying to tell you what to do with your life. You have been doing that for 62 years, without my input, and you have done it well. I am just removing some of the obstacles. The way someone should have done for you a long time ago. One more thing. You asked me, or almost asked me, why I kept coming back. To the cafe. To the corner table. To the coffee, and the toast, and the conversations that were short but real. I came back, because it was the one place I was certain of myself. Wherever else I was, whatever else was happening, with the lawyers, or the estate, or Simone's very reasonable, and very exhausting concern, when I sat down at that table and you set the coffee in front of me, I knew exactly who I was. A person who mattered to one other person, for no reason except that he had decided she did. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Thank you, Earl. For the coffee. For the toast. For sitting down across from me in February, when you could see I wasn't okay. For bringing soup in a container, with a lid. For raising a grandson, who asks real questions, without knowing that's what he's doing. For losing a job, over someone you barely knew, without losing yourself in the process. And for cooking again. I don't know if you are. But I think you are. I could see it coming. Cook, Earl. Not for me. Not for Carol. For yourself. Because the world needs people who can make something good out of ordinary things. You have always been able to do that. You just forgot for a while. Go remember. Celestine. Earl sat at the kitchen table for a long time, after he finished. He read it again. Slowly. Both sides. Then he folded it along its original creases, and put it back in the envelope, and held the envelope in both hands, and looked at the tree in the yard, through the kitchen window. 32 years. Carol had planted it in a hole she dug herself, because she said she wanted to know it, from the roots. He thought about roots. About what you plant and what grows. He thought about Celestine in that corner for 9 months, with her timeline, and her notebook, and her falling apart cover, and her careful handwriting. Writing things down, because she understood that things needed to be given their full weight in words. He thought about the 19 months before Atlanta. 6 cities. The invisible woman in the worn jacket confirming, place after place, the thing she was most afraid was true. And then one city where it wasn't. One man with a damp rag, and a left knee that didn't cooperate. He had done so little. That was what he couldn't get past. So little. And it had meant so much. Which meant the bar was not high. Which meant that what she had found, so rare enough to search 19 months for, to wait 9 more months to be certain of, to spend 3 months writing, and rewriting a letter about, was not heroism. Was not brilliance. Was not any currency the world officially ran on. It was just seeing someone. Actually seeing them. Not the convenient version. Not the version that fit a category. The actual person. In the corner. With the 40 cents, and the damp jacket, and the hands that shook. He thought about how many people were sitting in corners right now. In cafes he'd never enter. In waiting rooms, and bus stations, and parks and all the ordinary places, where people collected, when they had nowhere better to be. Sitting there. Not being seen. He thought about what that cost a person. Over time. Consistently. He thought about what it had cost Celestine. To go to 6 cities to find one Earl Whitfield. 1. He sat at the kitchen table. The tree was in the yard. The house was quiet. His name was on a property deed 3 blocks from Harlow Street. He picked up his phone and called his son in Houston. 4 rings. His son picked up, with the sound of someone in the middle of something making room. "Dad? Everything okay?" "Everything's okay," Earl said. "I need to tell you some things. And I need to ask you something about Cody." His son went quiet. The background sound left. "What about Cody?" "He's fine. He's fine. But I'm going to be starting something. A restaurant. A real one, not a side thing. And I need to know if you're okay with him being part of that. With that being what he sees from me." Silence. Then, "Dad, are you serious?" "Very." Another silence. Then his son said, "I've been waiting for you to say something like that for 4 years." Earl closed his eyes. "Tell me about it," his son said. And Earl did. He told Cody that evening. After dinner, chicken and rice cooked with more attention than the meal required, because he was in the habit now. The habit of paying attention. The habit of making the ordinary thing well. Cody had eaten everything on his plate. "I have to tell you something," Earl said. Cody looked up. The eyes. Carol's eyes. Direct and patient, and carrying more than 8 years should hold. "Do you remember the woman from the café? The one who taught you to fold the birds?" Cody went very still. Celestine. He had known her name. Earl had not known that. "She passed away," Earl said. Straight. Because Cody was 8 and deserved straight. "She was sick." "She had been for a while." Cody looked at the table. He was quiet in the way he was quiet, when he was thinking something fully, before he responded. "Did she know?" he said. "That she was going to?" "Yes," Earl said. "She knew." Cody nodded slowly. "Was she scared?" Earl thought about the letter. The 17 drafts in the notebook. The building purchased 5 months before she was gone. The corner table she came back to every morning, because it was the one place she was certain of herself. "I think she was at peace," he said. "I think she had done what she came to do." Cody sat with that. He picked up his napkin. He'd been folding it, without noticing, the automatic movement of something practiced. He smoothed it flat and started again. "She gave me something," Earl said. "She left me a building. A kitchen. So I could open a restaurant." Cody's hands went still on the napkin. He looked up. "For real?" "For real." The expression that moved across his face was the kind Earl would carry for the rest of his life. Not the simple brightness of a child getting good news. Something more complex. Something that understood that good things could come through hard ones. That gifts sometimes came from loss. 8 years old. And he already understood that. Earl thought, "Carol and I did something right with this child." "Are you going to do it?" Cody said. "Yes." "Can I help?" Earl looked at his grandson. At the napkin half folded under his hands. At the row of birds on the windowsill behind him, from Celestine's perfect first one to Cody's lopsided early attempts to something that was getting steadily better. "You can start by rinsing dishes," Earl said. Cody considered that. "I thought you were going to say something more inspiring." "Rinsing dishes is how everything starts," Earl said. Cody looked at him. Then he nodded. Like that was, actually, the right answer. "Okay," he said. "Deal." The paperwork took 4 months. Not 6 weeks. Not 90 days. 4 months of permits, and inspections and contractor estimates, and one structural issue, with the back wall, that added 3 weeks, and several $1,000s, and one afternoon, where Earl sat on an overturned bucket in the shell of the building, and stared at the wall, and thought seriously about whether he was making a mistake. He was not making a mistake. He knew that. But knowing and feeling were 2 different things. He called his son from the building. Sitting on the bucket. "The wall is a problem," Earl said. "Fix the wall," his son said. It's going to cost. Dad? Fix the wall. Earl looked at the wall. She gave me more than I needed. I keep thinking. She knew what she was doing, his son said. She'd seen enough people receive money, and not build anything that lasted. She gave you enough to build something that would fix the wall. Earl fixed the wall. He hired 2 people he had known from his restaurant years. Both had moved into catering and both came back with the energy of people who had been waiting to return to something real. He found a front-of-house manager through a connection at the diner, a woman in her 40s named Bernadette, who had the organized calm of someone who had been running complicated systems for years and was looking for a better one to run. He wrote the menu by hand. Kitchen table. 3 drafts. Crossing things out. Adding them back. Cody sat across from him doing homework, occasionally looking up. What's a braise? Slow cooking in liquid. Low heat. Long time. Is it good? If you do it right, it's one of the best things you can eat. Cody went back to his homework. Put it on the menu. Earl put it on the menu. He named the restaurant on the last night, before they opened. He had been circling it for weeks. He knew what it was going to be, had known, since the afternoon in Loretta Gaines's office, sitting across from a deed, with his name on it, and a letter against his chest. But he had wanted to sit with it. To be sure he was naming it, from truth and not only from feeling. It was truth. He ordered the sign the next morning. Celestine's. Simple. Dark wood. Clean letters. The kind that looked like it had always been there. He stood on the sidewalk the morning the sign went up, and looked at it for a long time. The way you look at something you've been moving toward for a while and are now standing in front of. A Thursday. Early March. Almost exactly a year, from the day Loretta Gaines had called him at the diner. The morning of the soft opening, Earl got there at 5. He unlocked the door. Turned on the lights. Went to the kitchen, and turned on the burners, and stood in the heat coming up, and listened to the sound of a kitchen waking. Metal and gas, and the first breath of air moving over a flame. Something happening. He stood there for a moment. Eyes closed. Heat on his face. Then he started cooking. Roberta arrived at 8. She came in without knocking. Which was very Roberta. She looked around the room, the 12 tables, the wooden chairs, the handwritten menu on the chalkboard, the light that worked properly, and she said nothing for a long moment. I like it, she said. Earl looked at her from behind the pass. You're early. I wanted to see it before it opened. She set her bag down at a table by the window. And I wanted to apologize before there were people here watching me do it. She looked at him directly. I was unkind to her. I didn't see her. I don't know what I saw. Not her. A pause. I'm sorry. Earl nodded. I know. That's it. Just I know. What else is there? Roberta thought about it. I expected something more forgiving. You don't need my forgiveness, Earl said. You need your own. He turned back to the stove. Sit down. I'll make you breakfast. Roberta sat down. Ray came 20 minutes later. He was quieter than usual. He stopped on the sidewalk to read the sign. Earl watched him through the window. Something moved in Ray's face that Earl couldn't fully see from inside. He came in. He sat near Roberta. He didn't say anything for a moment. She was a real person, he said finally. I didn't treat her like one. No, Earl said. You didn't. Ray looked at the table. I'm sorry. I know, Earl said. Bernadette arrived at 9, with a clipboard and a system, and was already managing something, before she had set down her bag. Earl watched her move through the room, and felt the particular relief of knowing that part was in good hands. He didn't have to be good at everything. He just had to be good in the kitchen. He was very good in the kitchen. By 10:30 the room had 20 people. Soft opening, invitation only. friends and people from the neighborhood, and a few regulars from his diner months who had asked where he was going. They ate. They were quiet in the way people go quiet when food is genuinely good. Not commenting constantly. Just eating. Which was the only review that mattered. Earl worked the kitchen for 2 straight hours, and his knee ached, and his back ached, and he was 62 years old, and he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He was at the stove when Bernadette appeared at the pass. "There's someone here," she said quietly. "She says she doesn't have a reservation. Says she just wants coffee." Earl looked up. Bernadette had a way of conveying things, with her eyes, that the words didn't reach. She was doing it now. Something was happening out there that required him specifically. He untied his apron. He went out. She was at the corner table. The one by the window. Looking out onto the street instead of an alley, a better view than Harlow Street. She had chosen it without being guided. Because it was the kind of table a person chose when they needed to see something other than walls. Simone Broussard. Late 50s. Cashmere coat in dark gray. She had Celestine's height. Not Celestine's eyes, different eyes. But the same way of holding herself. The posture of someone raised to take up space, who had been spending time reconsidering whether they deserved to. She was looking at the sign on the window. Celestine's? She did not look up when Earl approached. "Ms. Broussard," he said. She looked up. Her eyes were red. Not crying now. Had been. The kind of red that settles in over an hour and isn't finished. "Mr. Whitfield. I'm sorry to come without." "You don't need to apologize," he said. He pulled out the chair across from her. He sat down. She looked at him. Surprised. She had clearly been expecting professional distance. The careful courtesy of someone who had just received a very large inheritance from the woman who was her sister. He just sat down. The way he had sat down across from Celestine. No announcement. No performance. "She wrote about you," Simone said. "In letters. She wouldn't use email. She said screens made everything feel less real. She wrote me letters, and she talked about you in almost all of them." "What did she say?" Simone smiled. And it was Celestine's smile. Not the shape of it, different face, different mouth. But the quality. The kind that arrived slowly, and meant something, when it did. "She said you wiped the same counter too many times," Simone said. She counted once. 7 times in 20 minutes. Something moved in Earl's chest. "That sounds about right." She said it meant you were thinking. That you wiped things, when you were working something out in your head. Simone looked at him. "She said she never found out what you were thinking about." "Most of the time," Earl said. "I was thinking about what to say to her." Simone nodded. She looked down at the table. "I was hard on her," she said. "About coming back. About the estate. I thought she was punishing herself. Or punishing us. I didn't understand what she was actually doing." A pause. "I understand it better now." Earl waited. "She was looking for proof," Simone said. "That it was worth it. The money. The responsibility. The weight of what our family is. She needed to know that underneath all of that, there were still people who were just..." She stopped. "Just people. Real ones. Did she find it?" Simone looked at him steadily. "You're sitting in it." Earl looked at the room. The 12 tables. Bernadette moving between them with her clipboard. Roberta and Ray near the window, talking in low voices. The sound of the kitchen coming through the pass, his 2 people working, the flat top, the quiet industry of a kitchen doing what kitchens were made to do. The sign on the window. "Celestine's." "She found it," he said. Simone nodded. She picked up the coffee cup. She wrapped both hands around it. Earl watched that. The exact same gesture. 2 hands around the cup. Holding the warmth. The reflex of someone who had learned to hold on to warmth wherever they found it. He stood. He went to the kitchen. He came back with a plate. Toast. Buttered. Cut into pieces. He set it in front of her, without a word. She looked at the plate. She pressed her lips together. She looked up at him, and her eyes were very bright. "She told me about this," she said. "The toast." "Did she?" she said. Simone stopped. Collected herself. "She said it was the first time in a long time that someone gave her something she didn't ask for, and didn't have to explain, and didn't have to be grateful for in any particular way." She looked at the plate. "She said you just put it down, and walked away. And that was everything." Earl put his hands in his pockets. He thought about Celestine's saying, "the most wrong, and most right answer I've ever heard." He thought about Carol planting the tree, because she wanted to know it, from the roots. He thought about Cody lining up birds on the windowsill. Largest to smallest. Progress moving in both directions at once. He thought about the kitchen. The burners lit this morning. The heat coming up. Something happening. "I'm going to go back to the kitchen," he said. Simone nodded. "Stay as long as you want," he said. "Order anything on the menu." "Just the coffee," she said. "And the toast." That's what she would have ordered. Earl looked at her. "That's what you would have had," Simone said. He nodded. He went back to the kitchen. He tied on his apron. He picked up his knife. He went back to work. That evening, after the last table cleared, and Bernadette had locked the front, and the kitchen crew had gone home, and the room settled into the quiet that a good restaurant earns at the end of a good night, he stood in the kitchen alone. He turned off the burners one by one. He wiped down the flat top. Left to right. The same motion. Different surface. The same intention underneath it. He turned off the last light in the kitchen. He walked through the dark dining room. Chairs upturned on tables. The sign on the window catching the streetlight. Celestine's? He stopped at the corner table. The one by the window. He didn't sit down. He just stood there. In the dark. In the quiet. He thought about her. Not with grief, exactly. With something that grief eventually becomes, if you're willing to let it, something that holds the loss, without being destroyed by it. Something that carries the person forward in the things they gave you. She had given him a kitchen. But before the kitchen, months before the letter, and the lawyers, and the deed, she had given him the question. "Are you afraid?" He had been. He wasn't anymore. He put on his jacket. Carol's jacket. He unlocked the front door. He stepped out onto Harlow Street. March. Cold still, but different. The cold that was thinking about leaving. He looked up at the sign one last time. Then he put his hands in his pockets. And he walked home. He did not look back. Not because he didn't care. Because he had already decided. And when you have already decided, you walk in the direction of the decision. You just walk.